In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where countless species have mastered the art of diplomatic communication and cultural sensitivity, humans remain refreshingly, catastrophically honest. While other races spend decades learning the intricate dance of interstellar etiquette, humans have a unique talent for saying exactly what they think at exactly the wrong moment. This is the story of Marcus Chen, a maintenance engineer whose casual compliment to an alien diplomat nearly started an interstellar incident and accidentally began the most important cultural revolution in galactic history. Because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in the universe isn't wielding a weapon or breaking a treaty. Sometimes it's simply telling someone they're beautiful. What happens when humanity's greatest weakness becomes its most powerful asset? When a single moment of honest appreciation challenges everything the galaxy thought it knew about strength, beauty, and the terrifying authenticity of the human spirit, the answer lies in 3 simple words that changed everything. You look gorgeous. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a well-worn rag, squinting at the massive atmospheric recycling unit that had been giving him trouble for the past 3 hours. The Harmony Station, humanity's first major diplomatic outpost in the Andromeda sector, was supposed to represent the best of human engineering and cooperation with alien species. Instead, Marcus found himself constantly fixing systems that seemed designed by committee. A committee where nobody spoke the same language, and half the members communicated through interpretive dance. The station housed representatives from 47 different species, each with their own environmental needs, cultural protocols, and apparently their own ideas about what constituted proper ventilation. The Caltharians needed sulfur compounds in their air. The Vorthan delegates required precisely 17% humidity, no more, no less. The crystalline Zephyrite absorbed trace minerals through their respiratory systems and got violently ill if the air filtration was too clean. Marcus had been working on Harmony Station for 8 months now, and he'd learned to appreciate the controlled chaos of interstellar diplomacy. Unlike most of the diplomatic staff who spent their days walking on eggshells and consulting endless cultural sensitivity manuals, Marcus's job was refreshingly straightforward. Keep the air breathable, the water flowing, and the artificial gravity from fluctuating enough to make the Quellian ambassador sick to his 17 stomachs. Engineering to Maintenance Bay 7, his comm unit crackled to life with the voice of Sarah Martinez, his supervisor. We've got another atmospheric complaint from the Zelkoran delegation. Something about trace carbon readings being too low. Marcus sighed and tapped his comm. On my way, Sarah. These Zelkorans are pickier about their air quality than my grandmother was about her tea temperature. The walk to the Zelkoran quarters took him through the main diplomatic corridor, a stunning architectural achievement that showcased the aesthetic sensibilities of dozens of species. Holographic art from the Lumina Collective shifted and danced along the walls, while living sculptures from the Plant Federation of Verdania provided both beauty and natural air purification. The corridor was designed to make every species feel welcome, which in practice meant it looked like the universe's most expensive fever dream. Marcus appreciated the effort, even if he sometimes missed the straightforward functionality of human-only installations. There was something to be said for corridors that didn't require him to duck under flying sculptures or step around meditation pools filled with what the Aquatic Confederation insisted was holy water but smelled suspiciously like week-old fish. As he approached the Zelkoran delegation's quarters, Marcus noticed an unusual amount of activity near the entrance. 3 security personnel stood at attention while a group of diplomatic aides huddled nearby, whispering in the urgent tones that usually preceded either a breakthrough in negotiations or a complete diplomatic disaster. In Marcus's experience, it was usually the latter. The Zelkoran species was relatively new to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. They were humanoid in basic structure, but taller and more elegant than humans, with skin that shifted colors based on emotion and circumstances. Their culture placed enormous emphasis on aesthetic beauty and artistic expression, which made them valuable allies in cultural exchanges but somewhat challenging neighbors when it came to environmental standards. Marcus approached the senior aide, a nervous-looking human woman named Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in Zelkoran cultural protocols. "What's the situation, Doc?" Sarah said something about carbon readings, but this looks like more than an air quality complaint. Dr. Walsh looked up from her tablet with the expression of someone who had been reading the same problem for hours without finding a solution. "It's complicated, Marcus. The Zelkoran delegation is hosting a cultural appreciation ceremony today. They've invited representatives from 15 different species to observe their traditional art forms and participate in cultural exchange activities. Sounds nice. Hey, what's the problem?" The problem is that their atmospheric requirements for the ceremony are incredibly specific. They need exact CO2 levels, precise humidity, specific trace minerals in the air, and the temperature has to be maintained within a range of exactly 2 degrees. If any of these factors are off, the ceremony cannot proceed, and refusing to hold the ceremony would be considered a grave insult to all the invited species. Marcus nodded slowly. In his 8 months on Harmony Station, he'd learned that nearly everything alien species did could be considered either a grave insult or a tremendous honor, depending on circumstances that were rarely clear to humans until after the fact. "Okay, so we make sure their air is perfect." "That's what I'm here for." "That's just it," Dr. Walsh continued. "We've been trying to calibrate their atmospheric systems for 6 hours. Every time we think we have it right, something shifts. The Caltharian sulfur compounds are interfering with the Zelkoran trace minerals. The Vorthan humidity requirements are affecting the temperature controls. And the Zephyrite mineral absorption is throwing off everyone's air quality readings." Marcus looked at his diagnostic equipment and sighed. This was exactly the kind of problem that made him appreciate human engineering. When humans needed specific atmospheric conditions, they built separate rooms with independent life support systems. When aliens needed specific atmospheric conditions, they apparently decided to hold ceremonies in shared spaces and expect the universe to cooperate. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. 4 hours until the ceremony begins. If we can't solve this, it'll be the first major cultural event canceled since the station opened. The Zelkoran ambassador has been planning this for months. Marcus hefted his toolkit and headed toward the atmospheric control panel. "Well, when you put it like that, I guess I'd better get to work." The Zelkoran atmospheric control system was a marvel of alien engineering that made absolutely no sense from a human perspective. Instead of straightforward controls for temperature, humidity, and air composition, the Zelkoran system used what their technical documentation called harmonic atmospheric resonance. As far as Marcus could tell, this meant that every atmospheric variable was connected to every other atmospheric variable in a complex web of interdependencies that required constant micro-adjustments to maintain balance. Marcus spent the next 2 hours learning more about Zelkoran atmospheric engineering than he'd ever wanted to know. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed. The problem was that it was designed to work in isolation, not in a space station where 46 other species were simultaneously affecting air quality throughout the connected atmospheric systems. "Any progress?" Dr. Walsh asked, checking in for the 4th time in an hour. "I'm learning a lot about how not to design life support systems," Marcus replied, not looking up from his diagnostic readouts. "But I think I'm getting close to something. The problem isn't with their system specifically. It's that their system is trying to maintain perfect atmospheric balance while everyone else's systems are creating constant fluctuations. It's like trying to tune a guitar while someone else is playing drums next to your ears. Can you fix it?" Marcus studied the readings for another moment, then nodded slowly. "I think so, but it's going to require some creative problem solving, and I'm going to need access to the station's main atmospheric control center. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the central atmospheric control room, surrounded by monitoring equipment that tracked air quality throughout every section of Harmony Station. The room was normally staffed by a rotating crew of technicians from various species, but Marcus had convinced them to give him some space to work. The solution, when he finally saw it, was elegantly simple. Instead of trying to isolate the Zelkaran atmospheric system from the rest of the station, he could use the station's central air management system to create a buffer zone. By carefully adjusting air circulation patterns and creating temporary atmospheric gradients, he could effectively isolate the Zelkoran quarters without actually shutting down any environmental systems. The process required precise timing and coordination with atmospheric systems throughout the station, but Marcus had always been good at seeing how complex systems fit together. It was one of the reasons he'd been selected for the Harmony Station assignment, despite his tendency to speak before thinking about diplomatic implications. 3 hours and 47 minutes after starting work on the problem, Marcus made the final adjustments to the station's atmospheric controls and watched as the readings for the Zelkoran quarters shifted into perfect alignment. Temperature, humidity, carbon dioxide levels, trace minerals, everything exactly where it needed to be for their ceremony. Dr. Ballot, Walsh to Marcus. His comm crackled, the Zelkaran atmospheric readings just went green across the board. Whatever you did, it worked. Marcus smiled and started packing up his equipment. Just a little creative air circulation management. Their ceremony should be good to go. As he prepared to leave the atmospheric control center, Marcus decided to check on the Zelkaran quarters one more time, just to make sure everything was holding steady. The walk back through the diplomatic corridor gave him a chance to appreciate the success. In a few hours, 15 different species would gather to participate in Zelkaran cultural exchange, all because he'd managed to make their air exactly the right combination of gases and minerals. When he arrived at the Zelkaran quarters, the security personnel were gone and the diplomatic aides had dispersed. The area was quiet, except for the soft sounds of preparation coming from behind the delegation's doors. Marcus checked his atmospheric readings one more time, confirmed that everything was still perfect, and was about to head back to his maintenance bay. The figure that emerged was unlike any Zelkoran Marcus had seen during his time on the station. Most of the Zelkoran diplomats he'd encountered were older males with formal bearing and traditional diplomatic attire. This individual was clearly female, roughly Marcus's age, with the tall, elegant build characteristic of her species. Her skin displayed a complex pattern of deep blues and greens that shifted subtly as she moved, and she wore a flowing garment that seemed to be made from some kind of living fabric that responded to her motion. But what struck Marcus most was not her obvious status as a member of an alien species, but the simple fact that she was genuinely, strikingly beautiful. The afternoon light from the corridor's artificial windows caught her features in a way that emphasized the graceful bone structure of her face and the intricate patterns of her skin. She moved with a dancer's precision and awareness, and when she looked up and noticed Marcus standing nearby, her large, expressive eyes showed intelligence and curiosity rather than the formal diplomatic distance he was used to from most alien representatives. For a moment, Marcus forgot that he was looking at an alien diplomat from a species known for complex cultural protocols and potential for taking offense at improper interaction. He forgot that every word exchanged between humans and other species on Harmony Station was carefully monitored and analyzed for diplomatic implications. He forgot everything except the simple, obvious truth that stood in front of him. "You look gorgeous," Marcus said. The words came out naturally, the way they would if he'd encountered a beautiful woman at a coffee shop or library back on Earth. It was exactly the kind of honest, spontaneous comment that Marcus had been making his entire life, usually with positive results. It was also exactly the kind of comment that diplomatic training manuals spent entire chapters explaining why it should never, under any circumstances, be made to an alien representative during first contact. The Zelkaran woman stopped moving entirely. Her skin pattern shifted rapidly from blue and green to a deep, vibrant red that spread across her features like wildfire. For several seconds, she stared at Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. Surprise, confusion, something else entirely. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the musical quality that made Zelkoran language so distinctive, but with an undertone that Marcus definitely recognized as significant. "Repeat that, human." It wasn't a request. It was a command, delivered with the kind of authority that suggested this particular Zelkoran woman was considerably more important than her casual appearance had suggested. Marcus suddenly realized that he might have just made the kind of mistake that started interstellar incidents. But as he looked at her, skin still flushed that remarkable red color, eyes focused on him with an intensity that was both challenging and curious. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of being completely uncertain about whether he'd just made the best or worst decision of his diplomatic career. "I said you look gorgeous," Marcus repeated, because backing down now seemed like it would only make things worse. "I probably should have mentioned that I'm just the atmospheric systems engineer, not anyone important enough to be making comments to alien diplomats, but you do look gorgeous, I mean." The red flush in her skin deepened, and Marcus was fairly certain he was about to become the first human in history to cause an interstellar incident through excessive honesty about alien attractiveness. Instead, something entirely unexpected happened. The Zelkoran woman smiled, a distinctly human-like expression that somehow looked perfectly natural on her alien features. And when she spoke again, her voice carried what sounded remarkably like amusement. "Well, human atmospheric engineer," she said, "this is certainly not the kind of cultural exchange I was expecting today." Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment as the full implications of his situation began to sink in. He was standing in the main diplomatic corridor of Harmony Station, having just told an alien woman she was gorgeous, and she was looking at him with an expression that he couldn't quite interpret but suspected was probably not good for his continued employment prospects. "I'm really sorry," Marcus began, shifting his weight awkwardly while clutching his diagnostic equipment. "I don't actually interact with diplomats very often. Usually I just fix things and leave. I probably should have just checked my readings and gone back to my maintenance bay instead of—" "Stop!" the Zelkoran woman said, holding up one hand. Her skin patterns had shifted again, the deep red fading to a softer pink-orange that rippled across her features like aurora lights. "You are apologizing for giving me a compliment?" Marcus paused, confused by her reaction. In his experience, when he made mistakes involving diplomatic protocol, people usually wanted him to apologize more, not less. "Well, yes. I assume there are probably rules about humans making personal comments to alien representatives. I've never actually read the Cultural Sensitivity Manual, but I'm pretty sure casual compliments to foreign diplomats aren't standard procedure." "Cultural Sensitivity Manual?" she repeated, tilting her head in a way that suggested genuine curiosity rather than offense. "You have a manual that tells you how to speak to other species?" "We have manuals for everything," Marcus admitted. "Cultural sensitivity, diplomatic protocol, proper forms of address, appropriate topics of conversation, gift-giving etiquette, how to apologize for accidentally insulting someone, how to recognize when you've accidentally insulted someone." The list goes on. "I think the complete diplomatic manual set runs about 3,000 pages. The woman's expression changed to something that Marcus was fairly certain was amusement. 3,000 pages of instructions on how to speak to aliens? "Well, when you put it like that, it does sound a bit excessive," Marcus said. "But humans have a reputation for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. The manuals are supposed to help us avoid starting interstellar incidents through poor communication." "And you have not read these manuals?" Marcus shrugged. "I fix atmospheric systems and water recyclers. Usually, the most diplomatically sensitive part of my job is making sure the air doesn't smell bad. I figure as long as I keep everyone breathing comfortably, I'm doing my part for interstellar relations." The woman studied him for a moment, her skin pattern shifting to what looked like a mixture of orange and gold. "What is your name, human atmospheric engineer?" "Marcus Chen." He replied, then realized he should probably offer some kind of formal introduction. "Maintenance engineer second class Marcus Chen, assigned to Harmony Station Environmental Systems. I've been working here for 8 months, and I promise this is the first time I've made inappropriate comments to an alien diplomat." Inappropriate? She stepped closer, and Marcus caught a subtle scent that reminded him of flowers and ozone, like the air after a thunderstorm in a garden. "You believe it is inappropriate to tell someone they are beautiful?" Marcus blinked, struggling to process the conversation. "I mean, it depends on context. If I told Dr. Walsh from the Cultural Affairs Department that she looked gorgeous, that would probably be workplace harassment. If I told Ambassador Quellian from the Hegemony that he looked gorgeous, that would probably cause a diplomatic crisis, because I don't think the Quellians had the same concepts of individual beauty that humans do. And if I tell a Zelkoran diplomat that she looks gorgeous when I'm supposed to be checking atmospheric readings, yes?" she prompted when he trailed off. "Well, I honestly don't know what that is. I'm kind of making this up as I go along." The woman laughed, a sound that was musical and distinctly alien but somehow felt perfectly natural in the context of their conversation. "You are making it up as you go along?" "Pretty much," Marcus admitted. "I mean, I know how to fix atmospheric systems and water recyclers. I know how to calibrate artificial gravity and troubleshoot power distribution networks, but I don't really know how to talk to alien diplomats, especially alien diplomats who are—" He gestured vaguely in her direction. "Who or what?" Marcus realized he was about to dig himself deeper into whatever hole he'd started, but at this point, honesty seemed like his only viable strategy. "Who are distractingly beautiful and asking me to repeat compliments I probably shouldn't have made in the first place." Her skin flushed that deep red color again, and Marcus was beginning to think that might not be a bad sign after all. "Distractingly beautiful?" "Extremely distractingly beautiful," Marcus confirmed. "I mean, I was just going to check my readings and head back to my maintenance bay, but then you walked out and I completely forgot what I was supposed to be doing, because you're—" He waved his hand again, apparently having decided that gesturing was an adequate substitute for finding appropriate words. "Because I am what?" "Because you're the most beautiful person I've ever seen, human or otherwise," Marcus said. "And now I'm probably going to get fired for sexual harassment of alien dignitaries or causing diplomatic incidents through inappropriate appreciation of foreign representatives or some other category of mistake that I didn't know existed until today." The woman was quiet for a moment, studying Marcus with an expression that he couldn't read at all. Her skin patterns had settled into a steady, warm gold color that seemed to glow softly in the corridor lighting. "Marcus Chen," she said finally, "I am Zaratu Velindra, daughter of the Zelkoran Cultural Council and primary cultural exchange coordinator for my people's participation in galactic community activities. I am here to facilitate understanding between species and to help develop protocols for meaningful cultural interaction." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Cultural Council, primary coordinator. He'd just spent the last 10 minutes telling what was apparently a very important alien government official that she was distractingly beautiful. "Oh," Marcus said faintly, "you're really important?" "I am moderately important," Zara agreed. "And you, Marcus Chen, have just presented me with a fascinating cultural puzzle." "A puzzle?" "In all of my studies of human culture and behavior, I have read extensive documentation about your species' tendency toward what your diplomatic manuals call inappropriate directness. Your cultural analysts write many papers about how humans struggle with the subtleties of interspecies communication." Marcus nodded. "That sounds about right. But nowhere in any of our research have I encountered documentation of humans expressing genuine aesthetic appreciation for other species. Your diplomatic protocols seem designed to prevent personal observations entirely. Your cultural sensitivity training emphasizes safe, neutral topics of conversation." "Right," Marcus said slowly, not sure where this was going. So when you tell me I am gorgeous, you are doing something that is both characteristic of human directness and completely unprecedented and documented human-alien interactions. Marcus considered this. So I'm being typically human in a completely atypical way? Exactly. Zara smiled again. And the question this raises is whether your response represents a genuine human reaction or simply a failure to follow proper diplomatic protocols. Definitely a failure to follow proper diplomatic protocols, Marcus said immediately. I mean, I never read the protocols, so I can't really claim to be following them. But the reaction is genuine. You are genuinely gorgeous. Zara's skin flushed red again. You continue to say this. Well, you keep asking me to repeat it, and it keeps being true. Do you understand that aesthetic appreciation is considered one of the most intimate forms of cultural exchange in Zelkoran society? Marcus felt his stomach drop again. No, I definitely did not understand that. Physical beauty in our culture is connected to spiritual harmony, artistic expression, and personal integrity. To comment on someone's appearance is to make an observation about their fundamental nature as a person. So, when I said you looked gorgeous, I was accidentally making a comment about your spiritual harmony and my artistic expression and personal integrity, Zara confirmed. Marcus processed this information with growing horror. And that's either really good or really bad from a diplomatic perspective. That depends, Zara said, stepping closer again, on whether your aesthetic appreciation is genuine or merely a result of unfamiliarity with non-human features. Oh, it's definitely genuine, Marcus replied without thinking. I mean, I work on a station with representatives from 47 different species. I've seen a lot of aliens. You're not gorgeous because you're exotic or different. You're gorgeous because you're gorgeous. Explain this distinction. Marcus thought about how to articulate something that seemed obvious to him but apparently wasn't obvious to everyone. Some of the other species here have features that are interesting, or impressive, or aesthetically pleasing in abstract ways. The crystalline structure of the Zephyrites is mathematically beautiful. The bioluminescent patterns of the lumina are visually striking. The complex symmetries of Vorthan architecture demonstrate sophisticated artistic sensibilities. But, when I look at you, I don't think about mathematical beauty or artistic sophistication. I just think, wow, she's beautiful. It's immediate and personal and completely uncomplicated. Zara studied him for several long moments. This is a very human response. I'm a very human person, Marcus pointed out. Yes, she said thoughtfully. You are. And this presents an interesting opportunity. An opportunity for what? For actual cultural exchange, Zara replied. Most interactions between species on this station follow carefully prescribed diplomatic formats. Representatives meet in formal settings, exchange prepared statements, participate in scheduled cultural activities designed to minimize the possibility of misunderstanding or offense. Marcus nodded. That sounds very safe and boring. It is extremely safe and boring, Zara agreed, and it produces very limited actual cultural understanding. When interactions are completely scripted, both sides learn about diplomatic protocols, but they do not learn about each other. So what are you suggesting? Zara's skin patterns shifted to a complex mixture of gold and green that seemed to pulse gently. I am suggesting that perhaps your failure to follow diplomatic protocols represents an opportunity to discover what actual human-alien cultural exchange might look like. Marcus felt like he was missing something important. You want to use me as a test case for informal diplomatic interactions? I want to spend time with the human who thinks I am gorgeous, Zara said simply. And I want to understand what it means when a human expresses genuine aesthetic appreciation without consulting a 3,000-page manual first. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was saying. You want to spend time with me because I told you that you were beautiful? I want to spend time with you because you told me I was beautiful and meant it and said it without calculating the diplomatic implications first. But I'm not a diplomat. I'm just an engineer. Exactly, Zara replied. You are just an engineer who fixes atmospheric systems and thinks I am gorgeous. And I believe that combination might teach me more about humanity than a dozen formal cultural exchange sessions with your trained diplomatic personnel. Marcus looked around the corridor, half expecting someone to appear and explain that this conversation was some kind of elaborate test or practical joke. So let me get this straight. I accidentally made an inappropriate comment to an important alien diplomat, and instead of filing a formal complaint or requesting my transfer, you want to spend time with me to learn about human culture? That is correct. And this is based on the fact that I think you're beautiful? That is also correct. Marcus considered this for a moment. This is either the best or worst thing that has ever happened to me. Those categories are not mutually exclusive, Zara pointed out. Fair point, Marcus admitted. So what did you have in mind for this informal cultural exchange? Zara smiled, and Marcus realized that he could probably spend a considerable amount of time studying the different ways her expression changed her features. Well, to begin with, you could show me how you solved our atmospheric control problem. I understand you created a solution that impressed our technical staff considerably. You want me to give you a tour of the station's atmospheric systems? I want to understand how humans approach complex technical problems when they are not following predetermined protocols. Marcus grinned. Now that I can definitely do. Fair warning, though, I tend to get enthusiastic about atmospheric engineering. Most people find it boring. Most people do not have 3,000 pages of instructions on how to interact with me, Zara replied. I suspect I will find your enthusiasm refreshing. As they walked toward the atmospheric control center, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turns his day had taken. 8 hours ago, his biggest concern had been calibrating Zelkoran air quality for a cultural ceremony. Now he was apparently participating in unauthorized cultural exchange with one of the most important Zelkoran representatives on the station. It was definitely not the kind of situation covered in the diplomatic training manuals. But as Zara asked him questions about station maintenance and atmospheric engineering, Marcus realized that this might be the first genuinely interesting conversation he'd had since arriving at Harmony Station. And she really was gorgeous. The atmospheric control center looked completely different with Zara in it. What had been a familiar workspace filled with monitoring equipment and diagnostic displays suddenly felt like the setting for the most important technical presentation of Marcus's career. Zara moved through the space with genuine curiosity, studying the various control panels and display screens with the focused attention of someone who understood complex systems. This is remarkable, she said, running her fingers along the edge of a monitoring console. Your approach to atmospheric management is completely different from ours. Marcus pulled up the diagnostic readings from the Zelkoran quarters, watching as the data populated across multiple screens. Different how? Zelkoran atmospheric systems are designed around harmonic resonance. Every variable influences every other variable in predetermined patterns. The goal is to achieve perfect balance through elegant interdependency. Right. Marcus nodded. I noticed that when I was trying to troubleshoot your air quality problems. Your system is beautiful from an engineering perspective, but it's not very flexible when it comes to external variables. Zara's skin patterns shifted to a mixture of blue and gold that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the diagnostic displays. Flexibility is not typically a priority in Zelkoran engineering. We value precision and harmony over adaptability. But that's exactly why your system couldn't handle the atmospheric variations from the rest of the station, Marcus explained, calling up a schematic of the station's air circulation network. Look at this. You've got 47 different species with 47 different atmospheric requirements, and they're all connected through shared circulation systems. He gestured to the complex web of connections displayed on the main screen. The Caltharians need sulfur compounds, but sulfur makes the Zephyrites sick. The Vorthans require precise humidity levels, but the Aquatic Confederation delegates actually breathe water vapor and throw off everyone else's moisture readings. Your system was trying to maintain perfect harmonic balance while dealing with constant fluctuations from every other environmental system on the station. Zara studied the schematic with intense focus. So your solution was to abandon harmonic balance? My solution was to create controlled chaos, Marcus replied, pulling up the modifications he'd made to the circulation patterns. Instead of trying to eliminate the fluctuations, I worked with them. I created buffer zones and circulation gradients that turned the constant atmospheric changes into a kind of controlled instability. Controlled instability? Marcus highlighted different sections of the air circulation network, showing how his modifications created zones of varying atmospheric composition that shifted dynamically based on the station's overall environmental needs. See, the beauty of chaos is that it's adaptable. When the Keltharian sulfur levels spike, the system automatically routes that air away from species that can't handle it. When the Vorthan humidity requirements change, the buffer zones adjust to maintain local stability without affecting the rest of the network. This should not work, Zara said, but her tone suggested fascination rather than criticism. It absolutely should not work, Marcus agreed cheerfully. From a traditional engineering perspective, it's completely insane. But it does work because instead of fighting the complexity of the system, I embraced it. Zara moved closer to the main display, her skin patterns now cycling through rapid color changes that Marcus was beginning to recognize as excitement. You solved a harmonic resonance problem by introducing deliberately discordant variables. I solved a harmonic resonance problem by recognizing that perfect harmony is impossible when you're dealing with 47 different definitions of perfect. So instead of trying to achieve impossible harmony, I created stable discord. Stable discord, Zara repeated thoughtfully. This is a very human solution. Is that good or bad? It is fascinating, she replied. In Zelkoran engineering, stable discord would be considered a contradiction in terms. Either something is stable or it is discordant. It cannot be both. Marcus considered this. But that's not true, though. Look at human music. Some of the most beautiful compositions use controlled dissonance to create emotional impact. Or human society, we function pretty well despite having millions of people with completely different values and priorities living together. You see harmony in discord? I see stability in managed complexity, Marcus clarified. Perfect harmony is brittle. If every variable has to be exactly right for the system to work, then any change breaks everything. But if you build a system that works with change instead of despite it, you get something that's more robust and more interesting. Zara was quiet for several minutes, studying the atmospheric control displays with intense concentration. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note that Marcus hadn't heard before. Marcus, what you have done here represents a fundamental philosophical challenge to Zelkoran engineering principles. Marcus felt a familiar sinking sensation in his stomach. Is that bad? Because I really didn't mean to challenge anyone's fundamental philosophical principles. I was just trying to fix your air conditioning. It is not bad, Zara said slowly, but it is significant. The harmonic resonance approach to engineering is deeply connected to our cultural values. We believe that beauty emerges from perfect balance, that truth is found in elegant simplicity, that the highest achievement of any system is seamless integration of all components. That sounds like a beautiful philosophy, Marcus said carefully. It is a beautiful philosophy, Zara agreed. It is also a philosophy that has made it very difficult for us to adapt to galactic community membership. We struggle with the messiness of interspecies relations. We find it challenging to participate in collaborative projects that require compromise and imperfection. Marcus thought about this, watching the atmospheric readings pulse across the displays in their controlled patterns of organized chaos. So when I solve your atmospheric problem by embracing messiness instead of eliminating it, I'm accidentally demonstrating an alternative approach to problem solving? You are accidentally demonstrating that controlled discord can be more effective than perfect harmony in complex environments, Zara replied. And that is a very dangerous idea from the perspective of traditional Zelkoran thinking. Dangerous how? Zara's skin patterns shifted to a deep red-orange that pulsed slowly. Because if controlled discord is more effective than perfect harmony, then much of our cultural and technological foundation is based on a flawed premise. Marcus stared at her, suddenly realizing that their conversation about atmospheric engineering had somehow become much more serious than he'd intended. Zara, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to challenge your cultural foundation. I was just trying to solve an immediate technical problem. Do not apologize, she said firmly. Do you know why I asked you to show me how you solved our atmospheric problem? Because you wanted to understand human engineering approaches? Because I have been struggling with the limitations of traditional Zelkoran thinking for several years, Zara replied. I am a cultural exchange coordinator precisely because I believe my people need to find new ways of engaging with the complexity of galactic community. But until today, I had not seen a concrete example of how that might work. Marcus felt like he was missing something important. So you're saying that my atmospheric system modifications represent a model for cultural adaptation? I am saying that your approach to solving technical problems might also apply to solving cultural problems, Zara explained. Instead of trying to achieve perfect cultural harmony through careful adherence to diplomatic protocols, what would happen if we embraced controlled cultural discord? I'm not sure I follow. Zara gestured to the atmospheric control displays. Look at what you accomplished by working with chaos instead of against it. You created a system that accommodates 47 different species with completely different needs, and you did it by designing flexibility into the fundamental structure rather than trying to force everyone to adapt to a single standard. Okay, now imagine applying that same approach to cultural exchange. Instead of trying to minimize the possibility of misunderstanding through careful adherence to diplomatic protocols, what if we designed cultural interaction systems that could accommodate misunderstanding as a natural and potentially valuable part of the process? Marcus thought about this, realizing that Zara was describing something that felt familiar from his own experience. You mean like how I accidentally gave you a compliment that violated diplomatic protocols, but instead of causing a crisis, it led to this conversation? Exactly like that, Zara smiled. Your mistake created an opportunity for genuine cultural exchange, precisely because it was unscripted and authentic. So you think cultural interaction works better when people are allowed to be themselves instead of following predetermined scripts? I think cultural interaction works better when people are, with Trust Teddy, allowed to be themselves and when the interaction systems are designed to handle the resulting complexity, Zara replied. Your atmospheric solution works because you anticipated that different species would have conflicting needs and built that expectation into the system design. Marcus considered the implications of what she was suggesting. So if we applied the same approach to cultural exchange, we would design interaction protocols that expected cultural misunderstanding and conflict instead of trying to prevent them. We would design interaction protocols that turned cultural misunderstanding and conflict into opportunities for deeper engagement. Zara corrected. Just as you turned atmospheric discord into stable environmental management. That's either brilliant or completely insane. Those categories are not mutually exclusive, Zara pointed out with amusement. Marcus laughed, realizing that he'd walked into that one. Fair point. But even if the theory is sound, implementing something like that would require completely rethinking how diplomatic interactions work. It would require completely rethinking how diplomatic interactions work, Zara agreed. And it would require test cases to demonstrate that the approach is viable. Test cases like what? Zara's skin patterns shifted to a warm gold that seemed to glow in the control room lighting. Test cases like a Zelkoran cultural coordinator and a human atmospheric engineer engaging in unscripted cultural exchange to see what happens when two people interact authentically instead of following predetermined diplomatic protocols. Marcus stared at her, finally understanding what she was really proposing. You want us to be a test case for informal cultural exchange? I want us to be proof that controlled cultural discord can produce better results than perfect cultural harmony. And how exactly would we go about proving that? By continuing to interact as ourselves instead of as our respective diplomatic roles, Zara replied. By allowing our cultural differences to create productive complexity instead of trying to minimize them. Marcus thought about this, watching the atmospheric displays show the constant controlled flux of the station's environmental systems. So, instead of me learning to interact with you like a proper diplomat, and you learning to interact with me like a formal human representative, we just continue being a human engineer and a Zilkoran coordinator who find each other interesting? That is a surprisingly accurate summary of my proposal. And you think this will lead to meaningful cultural insights? I think this will lead to cultural insights that are impossible to achieve through formal diplomatic channels, Zara replied. The question is whether you are interested in participating in potentially revolutionary cultural experimentation. Marcus looked at her, intelligent, beautiful, proposing that they essentially ignore all established protocols for human-alien interaction in favor of figuring things out as they went along, and realized that this was exactly the kind of decision that would either make his career or end it spectacularly. When you put it like that, Marcus said, how could I possibly say no? 3 weeks after their first conversation, Marcus had learned several important things about conducting unauthorized cultural exchange with alien diplomats. First, it was significantly more complicated than fixing atmospheric systems. Second, it was also significantly more interesting than fixing atmospheric systems. Third, Zara had a remarkable talent for asking questions that made him think about humanity in ways he'd never considered before. Explain to me again why humans celebrate birthdays, Zara said, settling onto the observation deck chair with the fluid grace that Marcus had come to associate with her species. They'd fallen into a routine of beating in the station's observation lounge during the quiet hours between shift changes, when the space was usually empty and they could talk without attracting attention from either the human diplomatic staff or the Zelkoran delegation. We celebrate the anniversary of the day we were born, Marcus replied, which was the same answer he'd given the previous 3 times she'd asked this question. Yes, but why? Zara pressed. What is the cultural significance of marking the passage of time since birth? Marcus considered this while looking out at the starfield beyond the station's windows. I guess it's a way of acknowledging personal growth and change over time, like celebrating that you've survived another year and learned new things and become a different version of yourself. But humans also celebrate wedding anniversaries, work anniversaries, national holidays commemorating historical events, Zara pointed out. Your species seems to find cultural meaning in the regular observance of temporal markers. I've never thought about it that way, but you're right. We do celebrate a lot of anniversaries. Zara's skin patterns shifted to the thoughtful blue-green combination that Marcus had learned indicated deep concentration. Zelkoran culture does not emphasize temporal markers in the same way. We celebrate achievements and artistic accomplishments and spiritual developments, but not simply the passage of time. So you don't have birthdays? We have birth songs, Zara replied. When a child is born, their family creates a unique musical composition that represents their hopes for the child's spiritual and artistic development. The song evolves as the child grows and demonstrates their own artistic inclinations and personal character. Marcus tried to imagine growing up with a song that changed to reflect his personal development instead of annual birthday parties. That's beautiful and much more meaningful than cake and presents. But your birthday celebrations serve a different cultural function, Zara observed. They create regular opportunities for community gathering and affirmation of social bonds. The temporal marker is less important than the social ritual. You're right, Marcus realized. Birthday parties aren't really about celebrating the day you were born. They're about giving people an excuse to gather together and pay attention to each other. This is what I mean about controlled cultural discord producing valuable insights, Zara said with satisfaction. When I try to understand human birthday celebrations through Zelkoran cultural frameworks, They seem arbitrary and meaningless, but when I observe them as social bonding rituals with temporal structure, they reveal something important about how humans maintain community connections. Marcus had grown accustomed to these moments when Zara would connect their personal conversations to her broader theories about cultural exchange, but he still found it remarkable how she could extract meaningful patterns from what seemed like casual discussion. "Speaking of cultural discord," Marcus said, "I had an interesting conversation with Dr. Walsh yesterday. Zara's skin patterns shifted to orange, which Marcus had learned indicated either excitement or concern. About our cultural exchange activities, Marcus confirmed. Apparently, several members of the human diplomatic staff have noticed that I've been spending time with a member of the Zalkoran delegation. And this is problematic? It's unusual, Marcus replied carefully. Dr. Walsh pointed out that formal cultural exchange activities are typically coordinated through official channels with proper documentation and oversight. Informal personal relationships between human staff and alien representatives are generally discouraged because they increase the possibility of cultural misunderstanding and diplomatic complications? Exactly. Dr. Walsh was very polite about it, but she essentially asked me whether I understood the potential implications of developing personal relationships with alien diplomats without proper cultural sensitivity training. Zara was quiet for several moments, her skin patterns cycling through colors that Marcus couldn't interpret. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her that I was learning more about Zalkoran culture through informal conversation with you than I had learned about any alien culture through formal diplomatic briefings." "That was diplomatically inadvisable," Zara observed. "It was completely diplomatically inadvisable," Marcus agreed. "But it was also true. 3 weeks of talking with you has taught me more about how aliens think and feel and experience the world than 8 months of living on this station with formal protocols for everything." "And how did Dr. Walsh respond to this revelation?" Marcus grinned. "She asked me to write a report documenting my cultural observations and recommendations for improving human-alien relations based on my experiences with informal cultural exchange." Zara's skin flushed that deep red color that Marcus had learned meant she was surprised or pleased or both. "She asked you to document our conversations?" "She asked me to document the insights I've gained from our conversations," Marcus clarified, "which presents an interesting problem because most of what I've learned can't really be separated from the personal context in which I learned it." "Explain." Marcus thought about how to articulate something that had been bothering him since his conversation with Dr. Walsh. "Like I've learned that Zalkorans express emotion through skin color changes, and that these changes follow complex patterns that reflect both immediate emotional states and underlying personality characteristics. But I learned that by watching you change colors during our conversations, not through formal cultural briefings. And this is problematic because the cultural insight is connected to personal observation. When I write in my report that Zalkoran emotional expression is more complex and nuanced than human diplomatic briefings suggest, I'm basing that conclusion on the fact that I find your emotional responses fascinating and have spent considerable time studying them." Zara tilted her head in the way that indicated she was processing new information. "You find my emotional responses fascinating?" "I find everything about you fascinating," Marcus replied without thinking, then realized what he just said, which is probably exactly the kind of statement that proves Dr. Walsh's point about the complications of informal personal relationships with alien representatives. "Because your cultural observations are influenced by personal attraction?" "Because my cultural observations are completely inseparable from personal attraction," Marcus admitted. "I mean, yes, I've learned interesting things about Zalkoran society and communication patterns, but I've learned those things because I'm attracted to you and therefore motivated to understand you as an individual." Zara studied him with an expression that he couldn't read at all. "And you believe this personal motivation undermines the validity of your cultural insights?" "I believe it makes them subjective instead of objective," Marcus replied. Dr. Walsh is going to read my report and notice that all of my observations about Selkaran culture are really observations about you specifically. She's going to conclude that I've learned about one individual alien rather than gaining broader cultural understanding. Will she be wrong? Marcus considered this question seriously. I don't know. I have learned a lot about you specifically, but through understanding you, I've also learned things about how different species can communicate across cultural barriers, how personal relationships can bridge gaps that formal diplomacy can't, how genuine curiosity and attraction can motivate cultural understanding in ways that diplomatic protocols can't replicate. These seem like valuable cultural insights. They are valuable cultural insights, Marcus agreed. But they're insights that can only be gained through personal engagement, not through formal study, and that makes them inherently subjective and difficult to generalize. Zara was quiet for several minutes, watching the stars beyond the observation deck windows. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of excitement that Marcus recognized. Marcus, do you realize what you have just described? A fundamental problem with using personal relationships as the basis for cultural analysis, a fundamental breakthrough in understanding how effective cultural exchange actually works, Zara corrected. You have just explained why formal diplomatic protocols produce limited cultural understanding despite extensive resources and careful planning. Marcus felt like he was missing something important. How so? Formal protocols are designed to minimize personal engagement in order to reduce the risk of cultural misunderstanding, Zara explained. But personal engagement is precisely what motivates deep cultural curiosity and understanding. By eliminating personal motivation from cultural exchange, formal diplomacy eliminates the most powerful driver of genuine cultural insight. So you're saying that the personal attraction that makes my cultural observations subjective is actually what makes them valuable? I am saying that personal attraction is what motivated you to develop cultural observations in the first place, Zara replied. Without personal engagement, you would have no particular reason to understand Zelkoran emotional expression or communication patterns. With personal engagement, you are motivated to understand not just surface behaviors but underlying cultural logic. Marcus thought about this, realizing that Zara was describing something that felt true about his own experience. So the fact that I'm attracted to you doesn't undermine my cultural observations. It's what enabled them. The fact that you are attracted to me and that I find you equally fascinating has created conditions for cultural exchange that are impossible to replicate through formal diplomatic channels, Zara said. Marcus stared at her. You find me equally fascinating? I find you extremely fascinating, Zara replied, her skin flushing that beautiful deep red. Did you think this was one-sided personal attraction? I honestly hadn't thought about it from your perspective, Marcus admitted. I assumed you were interested in our conversations as cultural research, but I didn't know if you were personally interested in me as an individual. Marcus, I have spent 3 weeks arranging my schedule so that I can meet you here every evening to discuss human culture and atmospheric engineering and whatever other topics occur to us during conversation, Zara pointed out. This level of personal investment in informal cultural exchange is not standard practice for Zelkoran diplomatic representatives. So we're both conducting unauthorized cultural research based on mutual personal attraction. We are both conducting revolutionary cultural research that happens to be based on mutual personal attraction, Zara corrected. Marcus considered the implications of this revelation. So when I write my report for Dr. Walsh, I should emphasize that personal engagement enhanced rather than compromised my cultural observations. When you write your report for Dr. Walsh, you should recommend that the Human Diplomatic Corps completely rethink their approach to cultural exchange based on the superior results achieved through personal engagement rather than formal protocol adherence. That's either going to get me promoted or transferred to the most remote outpost in human space. Those outcomes are not mutually exclusive, Zara pointed out with amusement. Marcus laughed, realizing how much he'd come to appreciate her perspective on the non-exclusive nature of apparently contradictory outcomes. Fair point. So what happens next? Next, we continue our unauthorized cultural research, Zara replied. And we document the results to demonstrate that controlled cultural discord produces better outcomes than perfect diplomatic harmony. And we see whether the galaxy is ready for a revolutionary new approach to interspecies relations. And we see whether the galaxy is ready for the idea that the best way to understand other species is to actually get to know them as individuals, Zara corrected. As they sat together on the observation deck, watching stars and talking about cultural revolution disguised as personal attraction, Marcus reflected on how remarkably his life had changed since the day he told an alien diplomat she was gorgeous. It was still either the best or worst decision he'd ever made, but he was increasingly convinced it was both. 6 months after Marcus had accidentally revolutionized interspecies relations by telling an alien diplomat she was gorgeous, he found himself standing in the main conference room of Harmony Station, facing a panel of very serious representatives from the Galactic Cultural Exchange Commission. The commission was responsible for establishing protocols and standards for cultural interaction between species, and they had traveled specifically to investigate reports of irregular cultural exchange activities occurring at the station. Dr. P. Walsh sat at one end of the conference table, looking considerably more nervous than Marcus had ever seen her. Ambassador Quellion, the senior human representative to the station, occupied the center position with the expression of someone who wasn't entirely sure whether he was about to witness a diplomatic breakthrough or a career-ending disaster. The rest of the panel consisted of cultural affairs specialists from 7 different species, all of whom were studying Marcus and Zara with intense professional interest. Zara stood beside Marcus with perfect diplomatic composure, but her skin patterns were cycling through rapid color changes that he'd learned indicated either excitement or anxiety. Given the circumstances, he suspected it was both. Maintenance Engineer Chen, began the commission chairwoman, a tall, elegant Vorthan with the kind of formal bearing that suggested she had never made an unscripted comment in her life. You have submitted a report documenting what you describe as superior cultural exchange outcomes achieved through informal personal engagement. Please summarize your findings for the commission. Marcus took a breath and looked at the panel of alien diplomats who would determine whether his and Zara's experimental approach to cultural exchange represented the future of interspecies relations or a dangerous deviation from established protocols. 6 months ago, I made a mistake, Marcus began. I told cultural coordinator Zara Tool that she was gorgeous without consulting any diplomatic protocols or considering the cultural implications of aesthetic appreciation in Zelkaran society. According to every manual on interspecies relations, this should have caused a diplomatic incident, but it did not cause a diplomatic incident, observed the Caltharian representative, whose sulfur compound breathing apparatus gave his voice a metallic quality that made it difficult to read his emotional tone. It did not cause a diplomatic incident, Marcus confirmed. Instead, it initiated the most productive cultural exchange relationship I've experienced since arriving at this station. Over the past 6 months, Coordinator Zaratal and I have engaged in regular informal conversations about human and Zelkoran culture, values, problem-solving approaches, and social structures. The insights gained from these conversations have exceeded the cultural understanding I developed through 8 months of formal diplomatic briefings and structured cultural activities. The commission chairwoman consulted her notes. Your report claims that personal engagement and mutual attraction create optimal conditions for cultural understanding. Please elaborate on this assertion. Marcus glanced at Zara, who gave him a slight nod that somehow conveyed both encouragement and affection. Formal cultural exchange activities are designed to minimize the risk of misunderstanding by following predetermined scripts and protocols. This approach is safe and predictable, but it also limits the depth of cultural insight that can be achieved, because predetermined scripts prevent authentic cultural interaction, Zara added, speaking for the first time since the session had begun. Exactly, Marcus continued. When I told Coordinator Zaratul that she was gorgeous, I was being authentically human, direct, personal, and motivated by genuine appreciation. Her response was authentically Zelkoran, curious about my intentions, interested in understanding the cultural context of my comment, and willing to engage with an unexpected social situation. And this authentic interaction produced superior cultural insights. How, specifically? Asked the crystalline Zephyrite representative, whose translated voice carried harmonics that suggested skepticism. Zara stepped forward slightly. Her skin patterns settling into the warm gold that Marcus had learned indicated confident determination. Through our informal conversations, Engineer Chen has developed understanding of Zelkoran cultural values that demonstrates nuance and depth beyond what we typically see from human diplomatic personnel. He understands that aesthetic appreciation in our culture connects to spiritual and artistic assessment of personal character. He recognizes the ways our emotional expression through skin color changes reflects both immediate feelings and underlying personality characteristics. He has learned to interpret our communication patterns in ways that enable meaningful cross-cultural dialogue. These are valuable cultural competencies, acknowledged the Aquatic Confederation representative, whose tank-mounted translation system bubbled softly between words. But could they not have been achieved through structured cultural education programs? The difference, Marcus replied, is motivation and context. I learned these things about Zelkoran culture because I was personally motivated to understand Zara as an individual. That personal investment drove me to observe details, ask questions, and develop insights that would never occur to someone following a structured curriculum designed to avoid personal engagement.
The commission chairwoman looked intrigued, despite her formal demeanor.
You are suggesting that personal motivation is a more effective driver of cultural understanding than professional obligation? I am suggesting that genuine curiosity and personal connection enable deeper cultural engagement than formal protocols, Marcus replied. When you care about understanding someone as an individual, you pay attention to subtleties that are invisible when you're just following diplomatic procedures. And from your perspective, Coordinator Zarathul, the chairwoman continued, what cultural insights about humanity has this informal exchange provided? Zara's skin patterns shifted to a complex mixture of colors that Marcus recognized as her equivalent of a smile. Through my conversations with Engineer Chen, I have learned that human directness and apparent disregard for diplomatic subtlety actually represents a sophisticated cultural strategy. Humans use authentic personal expression to create opportunities for genuine connection across cultural barriers. What appears to be cultural insensitivity is actually cultural confidence, the belief that honest engagement produces better outcomes than careful adherence to predetermined scripts. This has implications for how we understand human diplomatic behavior more broadly, the Vorthan chairwoman observed. It has implications for how we understand effective diplomacy more broadly, Zara corrected. Engineer Chen's approach to problem-solving, both technical and cultural, demonstrates that complex systems often function better when you work with their inherent disorder rather than trying to impose perfect control. The Keltharian representative leaned forward with apparent interest. Are you suggesting that diplomatic protocols should incorporate controlled disorder rather than minimizing the possibility of cultural misunderstanding? I am suggesting that controlled cultural misunderstanding might be more productive than perfect cultural harmony, Zara replied. When Engineer Chen solved our atmospheric control problems, he did not try to eliminate the conflicting environmental needs of different species. Instead, he created systems that turned those conflicts into stable dynamic balance. Marcus picked up the thread. The same principle applies to cultural exchange. Instead of trying to prevent cultural differences from creating friction, we can design interaction systems that turn cultural differences into opportunities for deeper engagement. And you believe this approach can be scaled beyond individual relationships to broader diplomatic applications? Asked the Zephyrite representative. We believe this approach represents the future of effective interspecies relations, Zara said with conviction. Formal diplomatic protocols are necessary for establishing basic frameworks for cooperation, but meaningful cultural understanding requires personal engagement, authentic interaction, and willingness to work with cultural complexity rather than trying to eliminate it. The commission members exchanged glances that Marcus couldn't interpret, given that 3 of the species communicated through methods that had no human equivalent. The silence stretched for several long moments before the chairwoman spoke again. Engineer Chen, Coordinator Zaratul, your experimental approach to cultural exchange has produced documented improvements in cultural understanding between human and Zelkoran representatives. However, it has also violated numerous established protocols for interspecies interaction. The question facing this commission is whether the results justify the methods. Marcus felt his stomach clench. After 6 months of revolutionary cultural exchange disguised as personal attraction, their experiment was about to be evaluated by representatives who had built their careers on the very protocols they were challenging. If I may, Dr. Walsh spoke for the first time since the session had begun. I have observed the cultural competencies developed by Engineer Chen through his informal exchange with Coordinator Zarathul. His understanding of Zelkoran culture exceeds that of human diplomatic personnel, who have completed years of formal cultural training. Similarly, Coordinator Zaratul has demonstrated insights about human cultural behavior that our own cultural analysts have struggled to achieve through traditional study methods. Ambassador Quellian nodded slowly. The practical results are undeniable. The question is whether we can develop systematic approaches based on the principles they have identified without compromising diplomatic stability. The commission chairwoman consulted her colleagues through methods that ranged from whispered conversation to electromagnetic pulse exchanges that made Marcus's diagnostic equipment chirp in response. Finally, she looked back at Marcus and Zara with an expression that somehow conveyed both official formality and personal curiosity. The Cultural Exchange Commission recognizes the significant value of the insights gained through your informal cultural exchange activities, she announced. However, we cannot officially endorse the violation of established diplomatic protocols regardless of outcomes. Marcus felt his heart sink, but the chairwoman continued. Therefore, the Commission recommends the establishment of a pilot program for enhanced cultural exchange through structured personal engagement. This program will incorporate the principles you have identified: personal motivation, authentic interaction, and controlled cultural complexity, within a framework that maintains appropriate diplomatic oversight. Zara's skin flushed brilliant gold, and Marcus realized he was grinning despite the formal setting. Engineer Chen, Coordinator Zaratul, the chairwoman continued. You will serve as senior advisors for the development and implementation of this pilot program. Your continued cultural exchange activities will be documented as official research into advanced diplomatic methodologies. So, we're not in trouble for ignoring diplomatic protocols? Marcus asked. You are being officially recognized for developing superior diplomatic methodologies, the chairwoman replied with what Marcus was fairly certain was amusement. Though the Commission strongly recommends that future cultural exchange innovations be coordinated through proper administrative channels, as the Commission members filed out of the conference room, Marcus found himself alone with Zara, Dr. Walsh, and Ambassador Quellian. The silence that followed was broken by the ambassador's unexpected laughter. Engineer Chen, Ambassador Quellian said, in 30 years of diplomatic service, I have never seen anyone accidentally revolutionize interspecies relations by giving someone a compliment. It was a really good compliment, Marcus replied, looking at Zara, who was still glowing that beautiful golden color. It was a perfect compliment, Zara corrected. Authentic, personal, and completely inappropriate according to every established protocol for cultural interaction. Doctor, Walsh shook her head with the expression of someone who was still processing the implications of what had just occurred. So let me get this straight. You two have just convinced the Galactic Cultural Exchange Commission to completely rethink their approach to diplomacy because Marcus told Zara she was gorgeous? We convinced them to rethink their approach to diplomacy because controlled cultural discord produces better results than perfect diplomatic harmony, Zara replied. The compliment was just the catalyst. And now we get to spend the next several years developing systematic approaches to personal engagement in diplomatic contexts, Marcus added. While continuing our own cultural exchange research, Zara pointed out, Ambassador Quellion looked between them with increasing amusement. And this cultural exchange research will continue to involve regular, informal conversations between the two of you? Among other cultural exchange activities, Zara replied, her skin pattern shifting to a shade of red that Marcus had learned meant she was either embarrassed or pleased or both. Other cultural exchange activities? Dr. Walsh asked with obvious curiosity. Marcus looked at Zara, who gave him a nod that somehow conveyed both permission and affection and challenge. Well, Marcus said, we've been discussing the cultural implications of human romantic relationships and how they might translate to interspecies contexts. You know, for research purposes. The silence that followed this statement was broken by Ambassador Quellion's renewed laughter. Engineer Chen, the ambassador said finally, I believe you have just proposed the most interesting research project in the history of diplomatic relations. I have just proposed to continue learning about the most fascinating person I've ever met, Marcus replied, looking at Zara. Everything else is just the practical application of cultural exchange theory. Zara's skin pattern settled into a warm, steady gold that seemed to glow with its own light, and I have just agreed to continue learning about the human who taught me that controlled chaos can be more beautiful than perfect harmony. As they left the conference room together, Marcus reflected on the remarkable series of events that had begun 6 months ago with 3 words he probably shouldn't have said to an alien diplomat. It had been the best mistake of his life, and he was looking forward to discovering what other kinds of productive cultural discord they could create together. After all, the galaxy had just officially endorsed their experimental approach to interspecies relations. And Zara really was, I referred to the alien girl as gorgeous by mistake. She turned red and said, repeat that, human. Best HFY Stories.